Hello everyone. Welcome to another part of What If Deku Was a Scientist. If you enjoy the story, please like, subscribe and share the video. It really helps me out. I did not write the story. The original writer is that chicken dude. Please go support them. Now let us dive in. A few days later, an entire crowd of reporters were standing around a mobile stage and podium with a microphone. The stage was set in front of the entryway of NIP as they had heard this newly constructed research facility had a grand announcement to make to the wider public. The moment this was heard by any news outlet, people from all over Japan flocked to this one lone building in the middle of the city. Izuku and Egon stood within the building looking out into the sea of reporters eagerly awaiting the announcement. The both of them were in their best suits available and had practiced and rehearsed what they would say and do for this very day. Egon clapped his hand on the teen's shoulder and smiled at the boy as he saw him become very nervous. Izuku took a breath and smiled back at him, showing he was ready. And so the two of them walked out of the building and to the stage where the hungry reporters began to shout questions and flash their cameras. Egon struck up the mic and started off saying, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press." The crowd exploded into a strike of questions and flashing cameras as Egon exclaimed, "Please, please. Keep quiet." The crowd went quiet enough for him to talk and he continued saying, "Now I understand that you're all very excited and have many questions. We will get to that after the announcement we have for you. Now before we begin, my name is Professor Egon Cristello, owner and head researcher of the Neo-Icon Phoenix Research Facility, or NIP for short. I will now allow NIP's Vice President, Dr. Midoriya, to take over." Egon stood off to the side as Izuku came to the mic, arched it down towards him, and cleared his throat while starting with, Hello everyone, as the professor has told you, I am Dr. Izuku Midoriya, Vice President of NIP and second head researcher." Yet again the whole crowd exploded the same way it did for Egon, and Izuku also had to be firm in exclaiming, "Please hold on to all the questions I know you'll ask until after we've finished." Yet again they went quite enough for him to speak. And he continued after calming down internally, "Now then, I'm sure most of you have heard of our facilities attacked by the League of Villains no more than a week or so ago. Well, you'll be happy to know that we were able to handle that dire situation far better than we expected and have come out even stronger from it. Now I'm also sure you're wondering why we here have decided to go public despite being up and running for over 4 months. Well, it's because we were trying to get ourselves set up and stable. Our original plan was to go public much earlier until the aforementioned villain attacked, but I'd like to call it a blessing in disguise since we have far more defenses and security measures than before. If ever we are attacked again, then I truly pray for whoever is brave or dumb enough to do it," he explained to the crowd. After adjusting his overly tight tie he said, "Now getting to why I'm sure a few of you are here. You must be wondering what exactly it is we do here," and he fell off as he noticed a woman in the front row holding her hand up for the duration she was there, and Izuku said to her, "Lady in the font, you've had your hand up for the last 5 minutes and I'm getting tired from looking at it, so please ask your question. Is it true that your facility does not have any form of government funding? And is it true that you've refused it when offered?" the woman asked after putting her hand down. "Yes," he answered, simply making the crowd ask even more questions, to which Izuku shut down. "Please hold your questions." Once they went quiet again he sighs and continues from where he was before, getting back on track. "I'm sure you're wondering what it is we do here. Well, we have discovered a new form of energy that can be used in a plethora of ways, but the main application is for it to absorb a select type of material it is constantly soaking in and then reproduce said material. This energy source we have dubbed soul energy is placed into a special crystal that then becomes what we have dubbed a splinter." As he explained all this he took out an empty splinter from his coat pocket and presented it to the crowd, who started to take pictures by the dozen. He put the splinter away and explained, "From here we use several methods to turn the blank energy source into something already existing or mix and match. Soul energy can even be used by itself and causes a wide range of effects. And if you don't believe me, then how about I show you all one of our most successful and accident experiments?" At this point, Egon had vanished from sight to bring out their main attraction, and a few seconds later the glass entryway opened up like huge doors as a huge hairy animal stomped through before the awestruck crowd. Noticing the ever-growing shadow behind him he introduced, "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, meet Gammoth." Gammoth, with Egon on her back, stood on her back legs and trumpeted out loud as if to show off to the crowd. They asked no questions but began to shoot as many pictures as possible of the previously extinct animal. As they all awed before the huge creature, Izuku slyly added, "Now with everything said, we will now be taking questions." Just as he planned, the majority of the crowd was solely focused on the mammoth, and so only a select few people asked questions. The first one was an ordinary man who asked, "How did you do this?" "The elephant, I mean." "Trade secret," Izuku answered. The next was a woman with a bird face who asked, "Was you shown the wonders you created?" "They were and were given a waiver to not say anything until it has gone public. So you'll see them bragging online about Gammoth and what she did during the attack," Izuku explained. After that was another woman who was colored gold and inquired, "What are your intentions with such vast and seemingly limitless technology? Aren't you afraid villains and other groups will try to get their hands on it? That's why we've been preparing before going public. As for our intentions, it's for the good of mankind and the pursuit of knowledge," Izuku told her. "What are your quirks?" a man with a bird nest on his head asked. Hearing this, Egon slid down Gammoth as she ate off some of the decorative plants, and taking the mic he answered firmly, "That's not necessary information. Next question." But Izuku stopped him, grabbing at his sleeve and telling him in a low tone, "Egon, it's okay." Egon saw his assured smile, so he backed off and let Izuku speak, telling the person, "Professor Egon's quirk is used in the production of the splinters. My quirk is more silent, unseen, and not very useful. If anything, my intelligence is my quirk." The next person to ask was a strange man in a hoodie that covered his face as he shoved his hands in his pockets. "Why is someone like you in a position like this?" he asked in a vague, yet sinister tone. Not realizing how he was spoken to, Izuku informed him, "I realize I'm very young for being a vice president, let alone a doctor, but I can assure you that I dashed." "Not that," the man cut him off. Confused, Izuku inquires, "I'm sorry. Then what did you mean? How can someone who's quirkless get such a position?" he calls in a loud tone, causing nearly the whole crowd of reporters to stop taking pictures of the mammoth and look between him and Izuku, who now had his mouth dropped open in shock. Taking a dry gulp, he tried to ask back, "Wait, how did you dash?" But the man angrily cut him off and proclaimed while inching his way up the stage to the podium, "You're nothing. You and the rest of your kind are nothing. You should have gone extinct long ago. This world belongs to us." Egon pulled Izuku behind him, took the mic, and yelled at him threateningly, "Okay, mister, that's quite enough. I don't know who you think you are, but you are done." Guards dash. Egon tried to have him removed, but the man suddenly pulled out a gun from his hoodie, pointing it at Izuku, who was peeking out from behind Egon, and shouted, "Quirk supremacy, you scum." The crowd screamed and began to panic. Egon covered Izuku in his body and waited for the gun to go off, but never did as he heard the man suddenly scream. The two scientists looked back over to where the man was and saw him dangling by his leg, high above the ground in the trunk of a very angry Gammoth. The man tried to fire his gun on the animal, but she has enough experience with firearms to know what would happen, so she slammed him on the ground twice, causing him to lose his weapon. Feeling relief and calming down, Egon vexed him, saying, "Did you seriously forget about the mammoth not even 10 feet away from us? On second thought, don't answer that." Gammoth then slammed the man down again before throwing him at one of the newly planted willow trees. What he didn't know was that these were the new snatching willows, and quickly found himself wrapped up in its many long leafy branches, all tried up and ready to be taken by law enforcement. "Okay, drop the package," Izuku spoke over a radio as he, Egon, and Hollyhock oversaw the dropping of the tweaked reset bomb, now called the Island Bloom, on a boat in the ocean. Egon and Hollyhock watched as the boy stood unsteady on the ship, despite it not rocking at all, and rubbing the newly formed dark rings under his eyes as he yawned. The two adults look at one another and Hollyhock motions with her eyes. He nods and walks over to the boy. He jumps when the man places a hand on his shoulder and turns around with eyes full of adrenaline like a surprised animal. "Izuku, are you sure you're okay to be out here?" Egon asks in concern. Izuku pushes off his hand, waves him off, and replies nonchalantly, "Don't worry, Egon, we've taken every precaution possible. We're thousands of nautical miles from any sort of continent and hundreds from a human-inhabited island. Sure, the reset bomb is much bigger than the last, but we're over 100 nautical miles from it and pointed in the opposite direction, so if it does get bigger than anticipated we can easily move out of the way. We're literally in the middle of the Pacific Ocean." "That's not what he's referring to, sugar, and you know it," Hollyhock interjected with a firm tone. Egon breathed and tells him, "Izuku, you nearly got killed by some quirk enthusiast. Your mother was crying while holding you for hours as police and heroes investigated the whole thing. It was such a big scandal that every news station is covering it. Not very well, I might add. Hollyhock rolls her eyes at remembering how a few news outlets reported on it. Aren't you in any way affected by this? What are you feeling? Egon adds, looking at him with worry and fear. Izuku looks off the side of the boat, his gaze distant as he replies, unconvincingly, I feel fine, just fine. Better to get back in the saddle than let the horse run off on you. You didn't have an equestrian accident, you almost died, Egon exploded, making Izuku jump and look like a frightened rabbit. Egon calms down, breaths deep, and tells him, Izuku, I'm just worried about you. Most people would be freaking out or trying to hide away after such an event. But not you. Izuku thinks it over, shrugs, laughs, and tells him, I guess I'm just built differently? I gotta keep an eye on these readings. 1 minute before sea bottom impact. Egon and Hollyhock walked out of earshot as Izuku had his eyes glued to the tracking screen. Once on the other end of the ship, Hollyhock stressed to him, Egon, I'm worried about him. Egon nods while putting his hand on his cheek and saying, I'm stressed, me too, Pam. That kid went through a whole lot before I found him. I thought that by redirecting his interests and energy I would be able to help him. But I'm not sure if that's helped completely. Hollyhock sighs as she looks over at him and says, we all have to keep an eye on him. I think that the villain's attack might have changed something in him. Egon nods and replies, I think so too. Professor, Izuku suddenly calls, making Egon walk over to him where he tells him, the island bloom has reached the sea floor and is quickly expanding up and out. That's great to hear. That means it's war. Egon tried to say congratulations before he was cut off. I said it was expanding out, Izuku stated with more firmness and exaggeration. Egon raised an eyebrow and says back, I heard you the first time, Izuku. Expanding out and fast. We gotta go, he yells at the man while grabbing him by the collar. Surprised and then aback by his sudden and rough actions, Egon pulls him off and assures him saying, go? Izuku, we're over 100 nautical miles from the drop point, so we should be perfectly safe. The island should be no bigger than 75 to 89 miles wide or long. But before he could continue, something forces him to look off the boat. Before his eyes he saw an ever-growing and expanding land mass coming towards them. Egon panics and yells, holy shit. Punch it, Captain. Punch it. The captain sees what he's yelling about, panics himself, and kicks the boat up into the fastest gear possible. The boat rocked hard and the scientists on board had to hold on for dear life to keep from being thrown off. The boat pushed through the waves as fast as it could, but with its size, that was easier said than done. So eventually the rapidly growing island catches up and swallows them up. The boat makes landfall and crashes into the forming land, causing everyone to black out. After some time, Izuku wakes up from his blackout session and sits up from the cold deck of the boat to rub his throbbing head. He looked around, seeing darkness, and assumed he was dreaming, still blacked out, or his vision hadn't returned yet. Oh God, my head. What happened last night, he asks himself before remembering what happened and shooting his eyes open to look around. From there he tried to find his friends but can't, so he calls out to them in a panic. Egon, Hollyhock? Captain? Where are you? He yells with increasing volume on each name, becoming more and more terrified. Right here, Egon's voice calls out as he pulls himself out from one of the cabins. Man, that was a ride, Hollyhock complained as she pulled herself out from some boxes. Once Egon pulls himself up and out of a cabin, he helps the other two. From there he cracks his back and tries to look over the boat to see where they are, but doesn't see anything. Just black darkness. Had they been unconscious until the middle of the night? Then his nose picks up on two things, dirt and pollen. He looks up and sees bits of light peeking out from something covering them. Then he realizes that they aren't at sea but underneath the canopy of a thick forest. Eventually, the other two realize this and look out with him as he stares in wonder. Aha, wow, is all Egon can say. I think it was far bigger than 89 miles there, Professor, Hollyhock says in a snarky tone. Egon raised a finger to her and says firmly, don't even start, Pam. My boat. You brainiacs owe me, the captain, who burst out from the control deck, yells at them. Realizing what their experiment did, Egon assured him, don't worry, we can easily compensate you. So does that mean we can transport Torchwick? Izuku asks. Egon looks around at the new environment, seeing it still grow in several smaller parts, and tells him, I'd say we should wait for this place to ripen a bit before doing anything. For now, let's try and get back to the mainland. One day at NIP, Egon barges into Izuku's office and calls out in a chipper tone, Yoo-hoo. Izuku. He trails off at seeing the teen hunched over his computer and typing away at lightning fast speeds. Here, he falls off while seeing the number of papers, notes, coffee cups, and other things strewn about in a mess. He gets closer to the boy and says in a careful tone, "Izuku?" Without looking up from his typing, Izuku replied in a monotone voice, "Hey professor." Egon just stared at him for a while before trying to break the ice by saying, "You sure are hard at work, and, how long have you been working?" "Dunno," Izuku replied with a small shrug, still not taking his eyes off the screen. Egon felt his phone vibrate and taking it out he saw a text. Looking it over he said to the inventive teen, "Your mom just sent me a text saying that you didn't return home yesterday." Izuku said nothing, thinking he did hear him. He asked a bit louder in concern, "Have you been here all night?" Still did not reply, so he just yelled, "Izuku." "Not sure," he answered casually, only stopping to drink out of the now empty coffee cup. Egon narrowed his eyes, put his hands on his hips, and exclaimed, "Okay, that's it." He then took his young ward by the hand, yanked him out of his seat, and stated in a serious tone, "You and I are going out for lunch and fresh air." It took the teen a bit to realize what was happening, but when he did he tried to fight back in vain to get back to his computer. "What huh? No. I still have tons of things to do," he argued as he tried to reach out for it. "Don't care. You need a break," he exclaimed as he marched past the front desk throwing off their lab coats. He said to his front desk lady, "Megan, we're going out to lunch." "Have a good lunch, sirs," Megan said while waving them off. Later. Egon and Izuku now sat at an outdoor seating for a restaurant with an American theme. Sitting at a table closest to the street at the front of the establishment, Egon chowed down on a huge burger that was twice the size of his head. Though he seemed to be taking it all in with ease. After wiping his face of hot cheese he stated with zeal, "Man, I love these things. They have the most authentic American food in all of Japan." However, he was the only one enjoying his food as Izuku sat there and stared at it with a blank and somber expression. Taking a long sip of his soda, Egon asked him, "Izuku, you haven't even touched your Mega Meat Gut Punch burger. You can't tell me you're not hungry. You've been on a liquid diet of caffeine since yesterday." Izuku's gaze was still distant, his face somber and pale with the dark rings under his eyes looking darker and heavier than the last time. Whether this was from a lack of sleep or nutrition was up for debate. He just looked sick, tired, something was wrong, and Izuku was no good at lying. "I'm just thinking," he replied in a distant voice. "Anything you want to talk about?" Egon asked while putting his food down and giving him his full attention. "No," he said with a slow head shake, making Egon look away in concern. Only for the boy to suddenly perk up as he yelled, "Shit!" Surprised by this and looking around in a frenzy, Egon asked, "What?" He then followed Izuku's eyes and saw a small group of students from UA, and more specifically Class 1A, walking towards them. "Shit," Egon cursed with him. "They're coming this way. What if they see us?" Izuku exclaimed in a panic while pulling on his face. "They won't," Egon assured him firmly and took out a splinter from his pocket. Activating the blue-colored crystal, it shone a light around them that when died down seemed to do nothing at first. Looking at himself, Izuku noticed that where Egon sat was now an old man in his 80s. When he looked down at himself he noticed he was in some kind of black and white goth outfit and was given some attachments. Completely dumbfounded by what was happening, Izuku babbled, "What is dash?" "Appearance-changing splinter." "Just don't act like yourself," Egon quickly answered in his normal voice. Izuku did as he was told, took out his phone, and pretended to look at it. Just then the small group of UA students walked by the restaurant where they were eating. The group consists of Mina, Kirishima, Kaminair, Siro, and Bakugu. They didn't pay the disguised scientist any mind until something caught Kirishima's attention. The redhead stopped and looked over at the scientist, and more specifically, their food. With eyes wide and mouth dripping with saliva, he asked with an excited glitter, "Whoa! That's the biggest burger I've ever seen. Hey old guy, where'd you get that?" "The restaurant right behind me. But I'm afraid they will stop making them at this time. You'll have to come earlier or on the weekend, but only on Saturday." Egon put on a fake old man's voice while thumbing to the restaurant behind him. Kirishima snapped his fingers and complained, "Ah, man. Well, thanks anyway, old guy." As he left, Kainair said to him, "Bro, did you see that goth chick? Super hot." "Yeah, but she was with that old dude," Kirishima told him, thinking up something nasty. Kaminair waved him off and stated, "Maybe that's her grandpa?" Luckily for them, and Izuku most of all, throughout that whole interaction, Bakugo took no notice of them even once. Once they were out of sight, Egon took out the splinter again and turned it off. With a sigh, Egon heaved and offered, "That was too close. Maybe we should wrap up and eat back at the lab," to which Izuku readily agreed. So the scientists packed up their oversized food, left money on the table, and walked back toward the laboratory. On their way to it, Izuku, despite his distant glare, noticed something strange and brought it to his walking partner's attention. "Hey, Egon," the man hummed a reply as he told him, "there's a lady following us." Egon took a peek behind them and saw a very ragged, dirty, thin, and seemingly unhinged lady walking behind them a few yards away. She looked worse for wear and almost ghost-like, but Egon tried to assure him, "You sure she isn't going in the same direction?" After several minutes of walking and the same lady still following them, now just a few feet away, he finally admitted, "Okay, she's following us." "What do we do?" Izuku asked in concern. Egon scanned the area around him for some kind of outlet, and when he did, he cleverly pointed it out and told him, "We're nearly at the lab. Once we reach that corner we run like hell." Izuku nods. Walking calmly, they resisted the urge to just boot at that very moment, even when they were only feet away from the corner. Once there they ran like hell and didn't dare look back. Luckily for them, they didn't have to run very far since it was only a few blocks away. So their run was quick and they made it through the front entry in record time. "Hi Megan." "By Megan, we're back," Egon said quickly to the woman. "Welcome back," she replied, confused. From there the two of them ran into Egon's office, where he threw the food bags on his desk and locked his door, for extra safety, before finally relaxing and breathing heavily due to their lack of exercise. "Made it," Izuku said breathlessly. "What a creepy old hag," Egon huffed between words with a hard shiver. Suddenly they were both startled by the office phone ringing, and Egon quickly picked it up with his normal voice, answering, "Yes, Megan? Sir, there's a woman here who wants to see you. Says she knows you," the woman told him on the other end. Izuku's eyes went wide at hearing this and he mouthed, "You don't think?" Egon shrugged and asked her, "What does she look like?" "Old, desperate, ragged," Megan listed off. Egon rolled his eyes and stated, "I meant her description, not your opinion. Old, dirty, crazy gray eyes, thin as a twig, blonde hair, basically looks like a crackhead," she listed off more in depth. Egon deflated and told Izuku, "Yep, it's that woman." "What does she want?" "You're not gonna see her, are you?" Izuku stressed to him in concern. Egon thought for a bit, then speaking to both his employees he instructs them to keep the silent panic alarm ready, and bring the spider web splinter. Megan hangs up and Izuku nods while going to the secret wall compartment to pull out the needed splinter and kept it close to him. Once ready they both walked out of the office and back to the front entryway. They hadn't even gotten halfway into the room when the strange woman saw Egon and kept at him. "Honey," she cried out. Egon freaked for a moment, then activated his quirk and kept her at bay with the sharp ends of his crystals while yelling, "Whoa! Whoa! 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 Back off, lady. I don't know who you think you are, but you'd better keep away." The woman looked hurt by his rejection and she told him, "What are you talking about?" "It's me. It's me." Everyone was confused by this statement, most of all Egon, who replied, "You realize that 'it's me' only works over the phone, right? If you're trying to be a scammer, you'd better try a different angle." Now she looked insulted by his accusation and stated, "What? No. I'm not a scammer. It's me, your mother." "What?" Izuku and Megan shouted in unison. "What?" Egon asked back with narrowed eyes, clearly not believing her. "Lady, just how dumb do you think I am? My mother is dead," he firmly stated. She then took an irritated disposition and roll-over eyes. She said, "Oh, is that what your father told you? Guess I can't blame him for how we broke things off. But I am your mother. I gave birth to you." Suddenly something clicked in Egon's head and he said, "Oh, wait a minute. Now I know you." The woman smiles at this, only to be shot down when he followed up by saying, "You're that evil witch my dad would always gripe about." Her face twisted in anger as she yelled, "Evil witch? The nerve of that man. I ought to give him a piece of my mind. In fact, where is he? I'll go to him now." "Try the cemetery," he offered while thumbing out the door. "The what?" she asked back in anger and shock. "Yeah, he's been dead for well over a year. Him and my mom," Egon informs. "I keep telling you that I'm your mother," the woman exclaimed, clearly annoyed with him. Egon rolls his eyes at the claim and tells her, "No, you're not. Naomi was my mother. She died with my father in the same accident." The woman raises her eyebrows, which are nearly gone, and asked, "Naomi? Who the hell is that? Egon sighs in irritation and explains, my stepmother. She and my dad married when I was about 6 and she's been my mom from then until she died. Do I have to keep talking about my dead parents to you? I'm gonna cry. She takes a minute to process all this and then says aloud, so, Rich is gone? Egon, clearly upset by this, half yelled, yes, how many times do I have to tell you? Rich, Izuku inquired, noting it wasn't a normal Japanese name. My dad was half American, Egon quickly explained. The woman then huffed, crossed her arms, and grit her teeth while saying to herself, well, this seriously puts a wrench in my plans. Plan, Egon repeated the word. Not realizing she said it aloud, she had no choice so explained to him, I was gonna get back together with your dad and be your mom again. Egon's eyes shot open as a smile exploded on his face and he laughed, what? Ah. Stop laughing. What's so funny, she demanded. After laughing for a bit, he calmed down and told her, you. That's what. Even if my dad was still alive, he'd never get back with you. The woman took a snarky look and placing her hands on her hips while flicking her scrappy hair she retorted, I wouldn't be so sure. I know my way around a man's heart. Egon shivered at the display and commented, more like around a man's pants. She quickly drops the sexy act and goes back to being angry and entitled while yelling, excuse you? How dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother and you will treat me as such. Egon glared harshly at her and tells back, how dare I? How dare you suddenly come out of, the gods know where, and try to input yourself back into my life like nothing happened. I just met you like 2 minutes ago and you expect me to treat you with any decency, courtesy, or respect? Especially after what you did? Get real. Confused by this topic with zero context, Izuku carefully asked, what did she do? Egon laughed dryly and stated with an angry crazed look, oh, where do I start? The woman rolled her eyes and stated nonchalantly, oh come on, that all happened such a long time ago. And it sent ripples that are felt today, he yelled back while spreading his arms. The moment you found out what my dad's quirk was and what he did for work, you left me, took his money, and ran like thunder, he accused her, making Megan softly whistle and Izuku looks away uncomfortably. She growled back and argued, it's your dad's fault for lying to me in the first place. If it weren't for that, none of this would have happened. Confused by her statement, Izuku once again inquired, his quirk. My dad was quirkless, Egon told him simply. From this statement, a light shit in his head, and Izuku finally realized he had the answer to a whole host of questions he had in the back of his mind. He looked at the man and realized that of all the things he thought up, he now knew that the man who helped him so much ended up knowing more about what it was like to be him from second-hand experience. As Izuku was in mindless thought, Egon continued his argument and half yelled, and sure, I don't agree with him lying to you like that, but he was young and the quirkless aren't given the time of day or treated like dirt. And he may have lied about his job and title, but he didn't do so about his salary. That still didn't make it any better, she pouted in response while looking away. Seeing her reaction, Egon clutched his hands and exclaimed in a rant, and if stealing from him wasn't bad enough, you tried to throw me away the moment I was born. Like literally threw me in the trash like garbage. And don't even try to say you didn't, my dad has proof and I still have it. You could have left me at my dad's place or put me up for adoption, but no. What kind of sick animal would do such a thing? The woman appeared to surrender as she sighed and slumped her shoulders while asking in a coy cutesy tone, okay, I admit I was wrong for that, but can't you forgive me? Egon repressed the urge to moan in aggravation, so instead he inquired, by the way, Dad told me that when you ran out on him, you ditched him for some meathead with a better quirk as you called it. What happened to him? Her face immediately shifts from cutesy to irritation and she says in a pissed-off voice, oh him? Don't even make me remember that jerk. He was lazy, lechang, lying, good for nothing. Egon put on a fake expression of worry as he vexed her, ah geez. Then why'd you leave him? Sounds like you two were a perfect pair. I'm sure you made a great couple. She growled while rolling her eyes and telling him off, oh don't even joke about that. Things were okay for the first few years until I had my second son and dashed. Before she could continue, Egon stopped her and exclaimed, whoa whoa whoa. Pump the brakes. I have a half-brother? She looked confused by him focusing on that part but shrugged and told him, I guess, but he was such a pain, and even worse than his father. He got into so much trouble and eventually became a villain. My last straw was when I got a call from the police. So I left him and my son for good to find you again. And here I am. Aren't you happy? She asked while batting her eyelashes and putting out her lower lip. On anyone else, this might look cute, but on a meth head that looks like her, it was just disturbing. No one in the room tried to hide the intense disgust on their faces. Which is when Megan asked, "Is she high?" The woman immediately turned back into a Karen and demanded, "Excuse you? No, she's right. Are you? 'Cause you can't be serious. If you are, then let me spell it out for you. I'm not happy you're here, I don't want you to be here, I don't want you in my life. I just met you and I already hate you. I can finally see why my dad would badmouth you all the time. I'm sure the only reason you're here, besides your second screwed-up family life, is because you heard I made it big and wanted a slice of that pie, right?" Egon accuses her. You just want my money. Not me, right?" Egon asks again, getting closer to her. Well, you can forget it. I don't care what situation you're in, go crawl back to whatever hole you slinked out of and continue to stay out of my life like you have for the past 30 years. You're not my mother and you never have been. So get lost, he shouted into her face before turning around to leave. But she didn't leave. She stood there for a moment with her eyes down and covered over in her gaudy hair while clenching her hands. "You brat," she yelled while jumping onto his back from behind and attacking him with her fists and nails. "Give me money. Give me money right now. I deserve it. You owe me. Be useful to me," she demanded while screaming like a banshee. "Get off, you crazy hag," Egon yelled while trying to fend her off. Megan panicked and froze in place at this. But Izuku did and sprang into action. Jumping on her back and ripping her off, Egon yelled, "Get off the professor, you crazy lady." But she screamed loudly and harshly while suddenly getting a strange burst of strength and ripping Izuku off her and screaming, "Get off me, you quirkless runt." Izuku was thrown against a wall where he was nearly knocked unconscious. She shivered in disgust and yelled, "How dare you touch me? I'm calling the police." But she never got the chance to pull her phone from her workout jeans as Egon saw red. He quickly grabbed one of the small decorative planter pillars and used it like a bat. The last thing she saw was Egon's furious expression before being hit so hard she flew to the opposite end of the room. Egon breathed hard while dropping the decor and commented, "Call that bitch." Sometime later the police had been called and detained the woman. She was shoved into a cop car, but not without yelling and making wild demands before finally being driven away. Meanwhile, Egon spoke to another officer about everything that had happened. The officer had a sober expression on his face as he had been there the last time when the laboratory was invaded. After penciling down the last bit of information, the officer told him in an apologetic tone, "I'm sorry that you've experienced even more trouble at your facility, Professor." Egon waved off his apology and assures him, "There's no need to apologize, officer. Compared to what we've been through before, this wasn't so bad. And to be fair, I kinda let it happen when I should have turned her away at the door." He tips up the brim of his hat and tells the scientist, "Well, I'm kinda glad you didn't. She has several warrants for her arrest in several parts of Japan. You've done us a service." "Gald, I could help," Egon dryly chuckled. Just before the lawman left, Egon stopped him and inquired, "Oh, one more thing before you go. Could you look into something for me?" The officer raised an eyebrow and replied, "That depends if it's within my reach of power. She had another son some time ago, my half-brother." He turned to Villainy. "Could you find out who he is and where he is?" he explained to him. Again the officer raised an eyebrow and asked him, "Couldn't you do that yourself? You have the resources and tech." "I'm a scientist, not a PI," Egon shoots back. The officer laughs dryly and tells him, "Fair enough. I'll see what I can do, but I make no promises." Egon nods and thanked the man before going over to where Izuku was being tended by a doctor for his injuries. Kneeling, he asks, "How are you holding up?" Izuku rubs the sore spot on his head and says with a dry laugh, "A bit sore, but I'm fine." Egon sighs as he sits next to him and asks, "Remember what we talked about?" "Don't know. We talk about a lot of things," Izuku says back with a dry laugh. Egon shoots him a look and reminds him, "About you taking unnecessary risks?" Izuku looks away in shame and tells him apologetically, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't help it. I saw you in danger and I blanked. I just acted." Egon sighed, then ruffles his hair while telling him, "You are a good kid, Izuku. You just have a fuzzy head with a good heart." Izuku smiles a bit until Egon firmly grasps his head, turning it to him as he tells him in a serious tone, "But don't make stuff like that a habit. I can protect myself." Izuku soberly nods in reply, his gaze growing distant once again. "Have you ever seen her husband?" Honey Lemon asked him back. He rolled his eyes and then explained, "He works overseas." The American dollar is very high over here. And that's not an excuse. She shrugged and offered, well, why not just tell her to get it off your chest? I can tell it's been eating away at you. Egon opened his mouth to argue, then he stopped as he thought it over. He slumped into his seat as Honey Lemon watered his reactions until he turned around in his chair and told her, leave me to my own business, Honey Lemon. She giggles and tells him, whatever you say. Just think about what I told you. For the next few days, Egon does think about it, a lot. And it didn't help that Inko came almost every day with a fresh bento for both him and Izuku. Finally, after letting his thought and emotions eat at him to the point he couldn't work, he confronted this just as Inko left after dropping off lunch. Inko! Wait, Egon called out as he practically bounded down the front steps of the entry. Once catching up to the worried woman he said, there's something I have to tell you. She quirked an eyebrow and the first thing to leave Egon's mouth was, a boo-da-boo-da-bee dab dipple dibbly. Egon continued to babble out more incoherent nonsense until Inko went from intrigued to frightened. She backed away and said, Wadash? Egon, you're starting to scare me. Egon held his breath till he was red in the face and let it all out in one raspberry before asking her, if I do that again, I want you to slap me. Inko nods in concern and Egon tries again. Gobble gibble go dash, this time Inko quickly smacks his face and stops his chicken scratch talk. He runs his face and says, thank you. As I was trying to say, there is something I have to confess to you. Something that has been on my mind for a long time. What is it? She asks him, intrigued once more. Egon rubs the back of his head as his face begins to burn up, then finally admits, Inko, I have feelings for you. But I know you are a married woman and that it can't work out between us. I just wanted to get it off my chest and not make things too awkward between us in the future. I'll drop it right here and now, he says while letting out a breath. Egon, Inko starts before grabbing both his hands, surprising him as she tells him, I'm flattered. Truly I am. I never could guess someone like you would fancy a woman like me. Egon was enamored by her, but only for a moment. When he realized what she was doing, he ripped his hands away and exclaimed, Inko, what are you doing? Have you forgotten your marriage? That's the thing, Inko says while looking down, drawing out the suspense in his heart before following up, I'm not. Egon's eyes go wide and he asks in confusion, what? But you and your son have told me your husband lives and works in America to provide for you? And your maiden name isn't Midoriya. I'm so confused. She sighs as she walks over to the steps to sit down, with Egon right beside her. Where then she tells him with shame, that was a lie. Well, partly. My husband lives and works in America, but not for the reason I told you or my son. Egon raised his eyebrow, now even more curious. Watching as the woman gripped her hands as tears welled up in her eyes as she admits, it's to stay as far away from us as possible. What? Why? Egon shamelessly asks her. After wiping her eyes she explained to him, when Izuku turned 4 and we found out he was quirkless, my husband dashed. She fell off her story until Egon filled it in for her and said, was shunned by his family for it, put in for a transfer, divorced you and had given up all custody, and is now paying you monthly child support from a world away. How did you dash? She tried to ask, surprised by the accuracy of his guess. He chuckled dryly while rubbing his head and looking down as he admitted, my father was in many situations like that throughout his whole life. And Izuku doesn't know, does he? Inko shook her head sadly and replied, he's already been through so much. I couldn't bring myself to tell him his father abandoned him. She takes out some tissues from her purse and wipes her face once more before taking a shaky breath and telling him, I'm not proud of myself for lying, but I know it was the best thing for him at the time. The two of them sit in silence for a while until Egon inquired, is it still the best thing for him? It's been so long and, I'm not entirely sure, Inko admitted while calming herself down and telling the man, but getting back to what we were talking about, I'm flattered you want to be with me, but I'm not sure you're making the right decision. Confused by her statement, Egon prompted her further and asked, what? What do you mean by that? She stands up quickly, nearly making Egon jump as she motions between Egon and herself, stating, come on, Egon. You are a tall, young, handsome man with a successful business. While I'm just a 40-year-old, short, chubby, divorced woman with a son. Oh Inko, please don't threaten me with a good time, Egon begged her as he shut his eyes with trembling fingers, a cold shiver and a trail of blood going down his nose, making Inko blush beet red. After focusing himself and cleaning away the blood, Egon told her, look, I don't care about how you look or whatever notions there are about you. I like you for, you. He took her hands and continued saying, when I first saw you it was like watching an exploding supernova. So beautiful and terrifying that I couldn't take my eyes away from it. Inko raised an eyebrow and asked back, you were terrified of me? When we first met you were 2 seconds from calling the police on me, thinking I was a pedo. Egon drowned out. That makes more sense. Inko's sweat dropped, remembering their first meeting. But I'll be honest Egon, I haven't been on the dating scene in a long time, she admitted in shame. That's great to hear because I've never been on it before, Egon readily admitted back. Inko shuffled on her feet and asked him, do you think we can take things slow? Perhaps start with coffee and work our way from there? Egon's mind went black for a moment as his head overheated with a plume of smoke coming off his head as he said in a stuttered hurry, why yeah. Sure. I'm just fine with that. Then I'll give you a call when I'm free, she tells him with a small wink before walking away. Sounds great. See you then, Egon says to her while waving bye. Once she was out of sight, Egon began to make a string of strange sounds and movements before falling to his knees and melting into the ground as he prayed to the sky, thank you gods in heaven. Meanwhile in the building, Honey Lemon clapped hands with Megan as the two watched the whole scene with binoculars as the other Morgan triplets alongside Cho, Cluck, and Otto all exchanged money for their bets. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting from the Yanmai office. Anyway, a lot has happened here at the laboratory and Yan man I need more coffee. I thought it would be best to report on it. So going in no order, as I've already stated in another log, probably, we were attacked when the leagues of, I don't know. Some villains came in when UA came for a trip of some kind and we weren't prepared. Everyone got out alive, except the villains. And we killed the giant monster they brought to kill All Might. It was a whole mess. We carved up the monster, found out a bunch of stuff, and, yeah. Oh. One other thing, we found some sort of thing on the monster's body. A calling card or signature of the person who made it. Going by DKG and now we're trying to figure out what it meant but it's not much to work off of. Anyhow, after that, we went on a full-scale modeling of this place and now it's 10 times more secure than before. We have turrets on the roof, new types of plants out front for hidden defenses, an anti-warp quirk generator, defense animals, silent alarms, super locks, sound-based weapons, chemical traps, rail guns, wall spikes, and just about anything you can think of. At this rate even if we get broken into, they'll be in for a whole world of hurt. Hankoyo is even trying to develop a sound-based force field. Hatsum even perfected his robot designs for all the grunt work and even a small armada of droids used for fighting a small army. He's even started production on a few special ones he called the assassin droids. Robots have far more human flexibility and lethality with the downside of very little defense, but he is having trouble since recreating the human body in a machine is very difficult. Once things were set up, everyone was allowed to go back to their own devices and continue on their previous projects. I personally haven't had the time to do any since I've been busy with stuff and things, and giving pointers or helping out with other projects and developments. I really do want to work on my stuff, but I always find myself helping someone else or writing down notes on an idea I have and then expanding upon it. Then it becomes too much and I give it to the rest of the team to see if they want it. After that, we then set a meeting on the problem with Torchwick. In short, he's gotten way bigger, way faster than any of us thought. We discussed termination, but in the end, it was Professor Hollyhock who gave us an alternative. She made something called a reset bomb, a small device the size of a really big watermelon covered in flora and highly unstable using a piece of the original Singularity Soul. In short, when this thing hits any area, it'll cause a massive and sudden growth of indigenous plant life. After which we tested it in the fallout zone of Hokkaido and it worked. It worked so well we decided to completely scrub clean the radiative zone and now it's safe for rehabilitation. Of course, this caught the attention of the government and they called for a meeting with us. We had prepared for this kinda event and things went better than expected. Then we decided to go public and things didn't go so well. During my speech, a quirk enthusiast tried to kill me but failed to do so. For some reason, he found out I was quirkless. I have no idea how, but he did. I have a hunch it wasn't a coincidence, but the gunman isn't so keen on talking to the police, it was really scary. It was like looking at KK Bakugo again, and this time he was out for blood and more. After this Hollyhock made a new reset bomb that was modified. It looked about the same but was far larger. Around the size of a small car with a larger fragment of the Singularity Soul inside. This one was dubbed the island bloom, and as the name suggests, it causes an island to form in an open space of water. If we had used a normal reset bomb to do this, then we would have just made a really big coral reef, which could be used to revive the coral reefs around the world. We were supposed to throw Torchwick on there the moment it sprang up, but Egon said we shouldn't, as he noticed, even hours later, that the new island is still developing. So it needs to ripen, as he says. It should be ready in a week or so, but I hope it's sooner because Torchwick is already getting to be the size of Gammoth. As for the island itself, it is quite possibly one of the most geographically marvelous places in the current world. It has so many different biomes in just 4,000 miles. There's a deciduous and evergreen forest, a jungle, a savanna, a desert, a swamp, a wetland, a high mountain with snow, a volcano with active lava flow, and some more I can't remember. From all this, we decided to name it. Atlantis was immediately out since it wasn't located in the Atlantic Ocean. So instead we decided to name it Pacifica after the Pacific Ocean. Anyway, back to what I was saying. What was I saying before? I forgot. Where should I go from here? Oh, I know. I'll report on what everyone made in the time that this place became more fortified. First is Cho, who I already stated before how she outfitted the facility with far more dangerous methods. She's even starting to make a laser gun with Dr. Cluck. Then there's Hatsum who, as I already said, is making new and improved robots. Honey Lemon has produced a whole host of different materials from several chemical compounds, such as super adhesive concrete for buildings, an instant air cushion for people who attempt to jump from high places such as suicide and trapped on top of burning buildings, and even a super dissolvent to speed up demolition. She's even been working closely with Anima on creating a new form of bacteria that eats inorganic matter like plastics, glass, and metal. We actually finished that one and have managed to purchase Takoba Municipal Park Beach for experimentation. Hankyo has figured out how to turn a splinter that is primarily positively or negatively charged into a base. I'll spare the details, but it doesn't seem to have any effect in causing evolution or quirks and just gives off the radiation that allows for extra energy given when in proximity of a living being. When we turned it into a quirk splinter, we found out that it was far more powerful than before. A normal quirk splinter will allow a person to utilize around 40 to 50% of a person's copied quirk, but this one allows the use of 80 to 95%. So we've decided to scrap all the current quirk splinters we have and make new ones. Luckily, through the intervention of Dr. Cluck, we now have a foolproof method and machine for producing them in mass stock. What took me months of work to do, can now be done within only a few hours. As of now, we've completely remade, restocked, and now making new splinters by the dozen. This gave me so many ideas that I've given to Cluck, and now she's going absolutely bonker with it. Which in hindsight wasn't the best idea. Pamela has been restocking the greenhouse since the last attack and is the main reason the outside of the facility is so easily concealed. She made a willow tree that grabs anything that gets too close. A tree that appears dead at first glance but when agitated will reveal a horrifying face that can produce a paralyzing gas and throw homing fruits that can latch on with sharp teeth and explode after a few minutes. Another tree, which I can't remember, makes flowers of different colors that have different effects. Several defense cacti and bushes, a rose plant that can cause extreme and uncontrolled aggression, grass that trunks into blades, shrieking flowers, and so much more. Unfortunately, many of the plants she made have been deemed too unsafe to be controlled without her, so they have either been discontinued, destroyed, or are to be sent off to Pacifica. Speaking of the island, Egon has given Anima full reign to do with it as he pleases. Since it's an island with no indigenous life, it's a blank slate for anyone to create a whole new ecology. You can imagine how he took that, by that I mean he fainted. Otto was pretty excited too. He has so many new animals he can put on the island as both a way to keep it at balance and protect it alongside the killer plants that will be placed on it. As of right now, the only creatures that will inhabit it in the near future will be Torchwick alongside a horde of dodos and the evolved sheep, being used as food for him. We found out quite recently that the new dodos I made months ago have an extremely quick life cycle. After an egg is laid, the chick will hatch in 24 hours and then mature into a full-grown adult in a week. How Pete has lived for so long is beyond me. But thanks to this we will be able to breed and cultivate more dodo meat to be sold. Anyhow, before this news was given to the creature division, Professor Genus had discovered and proved the aquatic ape theory. By testing some of the evolution splinters with a whole host of different primates and subjecting them to environmental stimuli, he was able to create a living mermaid. Currently, a small pod consisting of a dozen are swimming in a large pool in the facility. But since we don't have the heart to kill them, they too will be sent off to Pacifica with another new aquatic species. Genus also decided to look into the terrestrial fish theory and ended up creating sirens from a group of lungfish. I have the description of both creatures, but I think something is wrong with my eyes. I can see the paper. I think I'm gonna end it here. End of, whatever. Izuku turned off the mic and put the papers he was holding down on the table. He rubbed his eyes and tried to look at them, but no matter what distance he looked at it, short or long, he just couldn't make them out. What was happening to him? He felt his stomach twist into painful knots that nearly made him double over in pain and threw up into a nearby trash can. He tried to sit back up in his chair but found his limbs so weak that he couldn't even pull himself up. He tried to look at the computer screen but only saw a fuzzy light. His head began to spin and the sound of his heartbeat began to block out all noise. At that moment the only thing he could rationalize was that he just needed more coffee. So he stood up with all his might in legs that felt like they were stung with needles and made of jelly. He looked over to the other side of the desk where he saw his half-finished coffee. He tried to walk over to it, one arm on the desk and the other stretched out to try and grab it. But the few feet felt like yards and waves of pain and nausea hit him with even a slight movement until he looked up and saw the room spinning. He saw everything and nothing at the same time, and then, blacked out. That's where Honey Lemon found him. On the floor of his office and sprawled out with his face pale as a sheet. Then altered the rest of the facility when she screamed. After a long and white dream filled with nothing, Izuku opened his heavy eyes to another white room. He knew it to be one of the hospital rooms set up in the NIP facility for medical use or emergencies. He could only guess he was that emergency, even with such a foggy mind. He looked around and saw a person half asleep in a chair next to him. He immediately knew who this was and with a weak voice called, "P. Professor?" "Izuku," Egon shot up from his half-sleep while embracing him tightly. While on the edge of tears, he said, "Oh, thank the gods you're awake. I almost thought you had slipped into a coma." What happened? Izuku asked him in a weary tone. Pulling away and wiping his face, Egon asked back firmly, "What do you remember?" Izuku took a few minutes to think it over, then told him, "I was in my office, doing a lot of updates, I felt sick, and then, nothing." He looked over to Egon with an expression crossed between confusion and desperation. As if pleading with his eyes, trying to ask what happened. "Izuku, you had a serious medical emergency," Egon told him after taking a deep breath and continued to tell him, "I'm not sure how to describe it, but, you had a burnout. And a bad one at that." A loud honk was heard as if to agree with his statement, and Izuku looked down at the foot of his bed to see Pete nesting there. He then turned back to the professor and almost trying to make a joke of it he asked, "Was it that bad?" With a deep and somber expression, Egon explains to him, "Izuku. Your heart rate, blood sugar levels, and pulse were off the chart. Your body was under so much stress we thought you had brain damage. Not to mention the lack of sleep and nutrition in your bloodstream. It was mostly caffeine." He then looked off to the side, biting his fingers before telling him, "Izuku, you nearly died." Then Izuku noticed something he hadn't done before. He initially chalked it up to just walking up after a dead sleep, but now he saw how blurry his vision was. So he asked, "What's wrong with my eyes? You look so fuzzy. You put so much stress on your brain and eyes that you ended up messing up your vision permanently," Egon told him in a serious voice. He then went to his coat where a new pair of glasses had been made for him. Unfortunately, they weren't there, and just before he could start looking around he heard Pete start to choke. The dodo coughed loud and violently before finally regurgitating up the glasses. Egon sighs and swipes the spectacles before the bird could attempt to eat them again. After shaking and wiping them off clean he put them on the teen's face while telling him, "We found your prescription while you were out and made a pair for when you woke up." When Izuku's eyes adjusted to the new frames, everything looked like it did before. As he looked around the clear room, he instantly took notice of the state Egon was in. So ragged and worn out with bloodshot eyes, like he hadn't slept for days. A light beard dusted his face. Izuku didn't even know he could grow facial hair. He just looked bad. Even Pete looked worse for wear in comparison to how he normally looks. After taking everything in, he asked, "How long was I out for?" Egon raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is that seriously what you are focusing on?" Izuku made no counter, so Egon huffed and told him begrudgingly, "You were out for a few days." "A few days," Izuku yelled while suddenly getting a burst of energy and trying to spring out from the hospital bed while yelling, "I have to dash." Pete honks in fright and jumps off the bed only to hide right under it. But Egon caught him by pinning him under his body and exclaimed, "Oh no you don't." Trying to restrain the wiggly teen he yelled, "You are not leaving this hospital bed until you are 100% again. No exceptions." "No. I have to," Izuku argued. "I said no exceptions," Egon yelled back. "No, I have to. Let me go. I have to go back to work." Izuku attempted to struggle even harder, making the heart rate monitor go crazy. Nearly freaking out by this, Egon pulled a syringe from his pocket and proclaimed, "That's it." He then stuck the needle into the teen's neck and pushed the plunger, making the teen cry out at first before suddenly falling into a slump and calming down. "Sorry kid, but you left me no choice," Egon apologizes while getting off of him. As Egon resituated Izuku in his bed, the teen immediately realized the man used a sensitivity on him. As he felt the effects of the drug set in fast, he still attempted to fight back and tried to exclaim, "But, I have to." "No. You don't," Egon yelled at him, as he lay there. Egon then fell into his chair beside him, clutching his hair and breathing out a stressed breath as he asked in a fearful tone, "Izuku, why are you doing this? Why are you hurting yourself so much? Did you not hear the part where you nearly died?" But, Izuku tried to argue. Egon whipped his head to him and exclaimed in a half-yell with an expression of fear and pleading, "But what, Izuku? What? What excuse could you possibly have for hurting yourself like this?" Izuku said nothing in return and Egon turned away as he told him, "I tried to help you and did. All of us did. But we didn't want to push the issue in case you regressed more. We wanted you to come to us." He then took a shaky breath, balancing on the edges of crying as he said, "Now I see that was a mistake." Izuku saw all this and couldn't help the hard pinning in his heart. He had done all this himself. He didn't want to, but he did. He hurt one of the few people who cared about him most. Speaking of such, "Izuku," Inko yelled as she burst into the room. Looking up weakly from his bed, Izuku asked, "Mom?" Inko immediately wrapped the teen in a hug and sobbed as she said, "Oh, baby. Yes, it's me. I'm here." As Inko cried into her son and Izuku lay there with tears welling up, Egon looked on and thought to himself. After a bit he interjected and asked, "Inko, can I talk to you?" Inko got off her son, looked at the man, nodded, and wiped her tears away. After assuring her son she'd be back, she stepped into the hallway with the tall man where he stated, "Inko, I'm so sorry, this is all my fault. I should have been more strict with him, but I was trying to be too gentle and now he's here." Inko shook her head as she watched him drop his head in shame and assured him, "Don't be ridiculous, Egon. It's not your fault. You never once hid your concerns about Izuku from me and kept me updated. If anything, it's mine. Once again I proved to be an incompetent mother and allowed something terrible to happen to my son." Egon chuckled dryly at seeing her put the blame solely on herself and said while taking her hands, "Then I guess we both share the blame." Inko leaned her head on his chest and asked, "Why did he do this? To himself?" Egon sighs and tells her, "That's what I was interrogating him about." "Then let me help," she offered him, to which he agreed. The two of them then walked into the room where she started off saying, "Izuku," but the boy looked away as if knowing where the conversation would lead, and Inko told him, "Please look at me," but he refused and Inko tried a bit more firmly, "I need to know. You need to tell your mother why you did this, please." "I'm fine," Izuku finally babbles out something, still averting eye contact. At this point, Egon's blood pressure shoots up and he puts on the bad cop motif as he yells, "No you're not. You're lucky to be alive after the stunt you pulled on your body." "Egon," Inko scolded him. "Inko, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this for him. The sooner we get to the source the sooner we can nip it in the bud," Egon argues back. "I told you I'm fine," Izuku says a bit louder while looking at them. Inko shakes her head and asserts with tears, "Izuku you're not," but Izuku looks away again and Ikeo says, "Then in that case," she turns to Egon and tells him, "Egon, I don't want you to allow Izuku any access to his office or any work, even after he's healed up." Egon doesn't miss a beat to agree to her demand and Izuku, still weak and pale as a baby horse, tries to rustle himself from his sheets as he exclaims as much as he could, "What? You can't do that." Inko looks at him sternly through her watery eyes and tells him, "You may be working and have a salary, but you're still a child and my son." The dam finally breaks and Izuku tells with as much gusto as he could, and with thick tears he shouts, "Fine. I need to do this to make up for it." "Make up," Inko repeats. "For what?" Egon asks. "For my failures," Izuku finally admits as tears start to fall freely from his face. After sniffling back his emotions he explained, I couldn't be a hero, I became repulsed with the idea of it, but I've never forgotten it. Both Inko and Egon's eyes grew wide at this as he continued, if I couldn't be a hero then I'd help them to make up for it. So that's what you were gonna say when we first opened this place, Egon says to himself in remembrance. After sobbing a bit he continues to tell them, I thought it would be easy, but then the villains, and that quirkiest, and Bakugu. It made me realize I wasn't trying hard enough. So I worked harder and harder to make up for it. But I'm still so weak. At this, he finally breaks down and manages to roll over and into his pillow where he sobs his heart out. Shocked by the full disclosure from her son, Inko carefully seats herself beside her emotional son and asks him cautiously, Izuku, why didn't you tell me? Izuku calms himself down enough to speak and tells her, you don't make it easy for me to tell you. Inko is shocked by the revelation and can't bring herself to reply. While Egon what he's all this while leaning on the wall. After thinking everything over that he's seen and heard, he says to the two Midoriyas, okay, I can see what's going on here. They both look at the unusually calm man as he tells them, it's apparent that this is going a little bit deeper than some unresolved self-issues, but an issue of trust and truth. And from what I can see, you two seriously need to talk about the secrets you are hiding. You're hiding a secret from me, they both ask one another before gasping. Egon gives a small inward sigh and tells them, I'll just leave the room and let you two talk. Once the scientist left the room with the dodo tucked under his arm, leaving the mother and son, they both stayed there in uncomfortable silence for way longer than they needed to. Neither of them was sure which would speak up first and about what, and if it even would be the truth. This goes on for several minutes and the tension grows thicker with each moment. Finally, Inko breaks and she asks, Izuku, why is it hard for you to talk to me about things? Izuku looks away and tells her, 'Cause I'm always so scared of how you'd react. You never take bad news well. It'd make me feel like it's my fault. Inko looks gasped at this and she asks in a small tone, have I been doing that? Izuku gives the smallest nod in return as Inko looks down at herself in shame and apologetically tells him, I'm so sorry about that. It was never my intention. I just have always been explosively emotional. They both go back into silence when Izuku refuses to speak back, so Inko continues and asks further, do you feel this way because of how I reacted when we found out about, again, another small nod. Her eyes welled up and she said, I'm sorry, Izuku. I was so young back then, your father left, and I had no idea what to do or say. She wipes her face and gained control over her emotions as she admits, but Egon is right. There is something I've been keeping from you, about your father. Izuku sighed as his mother trailed off and answered for her, he's not in America for work. Just to avoid me. Shocked by his spot-on guess she stammered out, how did Dash? Izuku looked away as he explained, I kinda figured it out. And that you hid it from me because of what I was going through. Inko teared up once again and she told him in an apologetic tone, I'm sorry I lied. At the time I thought it was for your good. I understand. Thank you for telling me. I thought I'd have to bring it up, he told her as she leaned down to hug him and he tried his best to hug her back. After they broke away, he sighs stressed, and says, I guess it's my turn. Izuku took another few minutes to collect himself and finally admit, do you remember how I would come home looking like a mess almost all the time? Inko nods and Izuku feels the fear run up his spine as he says, I was bullied, relentlessly. I figured, Inko said back. Now it was Izuku's turn to be shocked as he asked back in a mix of confusion and hurt, you knew? Seeing what he was assuming of her, Inko told him, I tried to help. But that school had it out for you. I couldn't enroll you in any others 'cause they all denied. And we couldn't move due to my job and income. Izuku understood as he looked away and said, then added, but that's not all. Most if not all of my injuries that I got came from, he trailed off, a mix of emotions tightening his throat and chest until he could finally choke out, Bakugu. Inko was shocked as her mind raced with H questions, but kept silent as Izuku continues to unload on her, and worst of all, on the final day of middle school, he told me to kill myself, he finally admitted, a mix of a hot iron going through his chest and a huge weight of his chest hitting him like a wave. Inko was about to start bawling. She wanted to but didn't. She kept her emotions in check long enough for her to ask, why didn't you tell me? When Izuku thought about this he realized he had no idea why. Maybe he was scared? Maybe he was being stupid? Maybe he thought he wouldn't be believed? Maybe because it's always hard to talk? So, for now, he just told her a half-truth, Auntie Mitsuki is your only friend. I didn't want you to destroy the only connection you had. That's why I kept quiet. You didn't actually, Inko trailed off, thinking back to what he said. I did, Izuku confirmed, making Inko gasp hard for air until he followed up by saying, there was more to it, like how I met All Might and he told me I couldn't be a hero. If it went for the flurry of emotions she felt, then she'd be elated for him to meet the man he looks up to. But when she heard that, her heart sank. Izuku sniffles back and explains, but that was the day that Egon found me, saved me, and gave me a new path. He is my All Might. My hero. My light in all the darkness of my life. That's why I did what I did. So I could live up to him. Izuku began to cry again, thinking back to the day he was saved by no hero, but a normal man who was better than any hero out there. After calming down and his feeling of nostalgic gratitude faded away, he said, maybe I still want to be a hero. Maybe I want to be known and not invisible. Maybe I want some credit. Maybe, I don't know. Inko cupped her son's weeping and emotionally broken face, telling him with sweet words, Izuku. You've already done so much and are credited for so much more. You helped make this place, helped UA during the attack, aided Egon in his initial research of the single soul. Singularity soul, he corrected her. Inko's sweat dropped and continued saying, right, that. What I'm trying to say is, you've already become a hero in your own right. You don't have to live up to anyone apart from yourself. You are known for so many good reasons. And even if you weren't, you'd be known to me, Egon, and everyone else in the place you made. Suddenly Izuku felt the last burst of energy he'd felt for the whole day. He sat up and wrapped his mother in a tight hug, to which she hugged him back. The two Midoriyas shed silent tears on one another's shoulders as they held one another for longer than they knew. When they finally pulled away, cleaned themselves up, and calmed down, Izuku inquired, say, you're not hiding anything else from me, are you? Inko flushed red as she looked away while twiddling her fingers as she admitted, well, Egon and I are dating, Sudashta. Wait, what? Izuku immediately questions. After the two of them disconnected, Inko left the room with a lot off her chest and much more to think about. She was glad to get out everything she withheld but worried and thoughtful about what her son told her. Then she suddenly got a call on her phone and without even looking at the caller ID she answered it saying, hello? The voice of her best friend Mitsuki practically shouted through the phone as she exclaimed in excitement, Inko. Long time no speaking. How have you been? Anyway, you'll never believe it. I got 2 tickets to Dashta. Mitsuki, Inko cut her off. The somber tone she carries made the woman stop and ask, what is it? After breathing deeply with the memory of what Izuku told her, fresh in her mind, she told her, I think we shouldn't talk or see one another for a while. What dash? Inko, what are you dash? She tried to ask only for the phone line to go dead. Inko? Inko, Mitsuki shouted in a panic. Everything all right? Her husband, Masaru, asked as he poked his head into the kitchen. Mitsuki looked at the wall phone with a sad expression and said, Inko just said she didn't want to talk to me and hung up. Masaru came up behind, hugged her, kissed her head, and assured her, I'm sure Inko is just going through some stuff. Her son was in those 2 incidents. Maybe she just needs time to sort out her feelings and all that. Mitsuki hums and replies, I hope you're right. As Inko hung up the phone, her mind clouded with too many emotions to handle talking to her friend right away. Egon walked up to her with Pete under his arm. Hey, Inko. I wasn't pretending to come back here as soon as you were done speaking with Izuku and I wasn't eavesdropping the whole time and Dashta. He began to tell her until Inko suddenly grabbed him by the collar, pulling him down to her level and passionately kissing him on the lips. Egon froze in place. His mind, blank yet racing. His body, still yet trembling. His breath, caught yet heavy. His face, hot and burning. Inko pulled away and told him in a grateful tone, thank you for saving my son. Egon said nothing in return. He could say anything. Not even sounds. So he just sputtered, grew red, produced steam, and fell to the floor face first. There Inko looked surprised by his reaction and Pete began to peck his head. After this, Izuku spent another 2 weeks recuperating in the hospital while being banned from working on anything else. It was nice for him. Like a long-due vacation but without anything to do other than sleep, eat, and heal. The teen was put on a round of different medications for his stress and anxiety alongside weekly talks with a therapist and a family therapist for him and Inko. When he finally got out of the hospital area, his office had been moved closer to Egon's, and he would go to check up on him every so often to make sure he wasn't overworking. When he wasn't in or busy, a robot assistant would do that job. After about another 2 weeks, Coming back into his work and new routine, Izuku showed signs of getting better and he felt better too. For him, it was nice to finally admit everything he was holding back to the people he loved. It felt right to be open and vulnerable to them, knowing he would never be judged again. Now he felt happy. Truly happy. One day at the Neo-Icon Phoenix research facility, the whole building was flooded with the sound of incoherent screaming. Screaming that lasted from the first thing in the morning till right this moment. Most everyone was able to power through it except for Cho, who looked like she was ready to rip someone's head off. Finally having enough, she charges out of her division wing and barrels through the hallway, following the yelling until she finds it at the break room where she bursts through the door and yells louder than whoever was. What's going on here? What's with all the yelling? Who is yelling? It's only 10 in the morning, she screamed so loud that the shouting stopped all at once upon the sight of the fuming woman. They are, Hankoyo, who was in the break room, pointed to Izuku and Egon, both of which were silently cowering from the homicidal-looking woman. Calming down from the confusion of seeing the two people in the facility with the strongest bond arguing, she could only babble back, "What the dash?" Izuku found out that Egon is dating his mom, Honey Lemon, who was also in the break room, explained with a giggle. Cho raised her eyebrows and asked, "It took him this long?" Now it was Izuku's turn to be surprised as he half yelled in shock, "You knew?" Izuku, Egon tried to grab his attention. Izuku quickly connected the dots and exclaimed while pointing his finger, "You all knew?" Izuku, Egon tries more firmly. Izuku whips his head back to the man and proclaims, "Don't you Izuku me. Why are you dating my mom?" "'Cause she's hot," Egon argues back. "Egon. She is. She's my mom. So? You're my employer. It's weird. It's only weird if you make it." "Egon," Izuku yells. "Izuku," Egon yelled. While the two of them bicker once more, Honey Lemon whispers to Hankoyo, "I heard they've already gone out on several dates." "Oh," Hankoyo cooed back in excitement at the gossip. "And get this," she exclaimed in a low tone while waving her hands, "I heard that they've even been holding hands," she squeals. Gasp. "No," Hankoyo says in fake playful surprise. "Fingers laced," she said in a squeaky tone. "How lewd," Hankoyo comments while putting his finger to his mouth, his head tubes making weird cute sounds. "Doesn't that make babies?" Honey Lemon asks with a giggle. At this point, Cho has had enough for the whole day. So she shakes her head and leaves the break room, making a mental note to get headphones. Despite their low whispered tone, Izuku and Egon could hear them the whole time and stopped their bickering to stare at them. After they finish and Cho leaves, Egon shouts at them, "Can you two stop being weeboos? You're scientists, for goodness sake, act like it." "Ahem," calls the loud voice of Morgan. "What?" the two scientists half yell at the woman. "If you two are done having a family squabble dashta," she began only to be cut off. "Don't you dare marry my mom," Izuku demanded. Egon looked down at him and proclaimed, "Just for that, I'm gonna marry her sooner than planned." This struck a nerve in the boy and he quickly kicked the man, causing him to grab his leg and yell, "Ow, my shin." Since they were quite ish, Morgan continued and informed them, "As I was saying, you two have several people who want to have an interview for a job." "Are we still hiring?" Izuku asks her. "As it turns out, we never took the hiring page down on the website," she explained to him. "Ah piss. So how many are there?" Egon asks between painful breaths and hopping on one leg. "About 6 in total, with 2 of them being a pair," she answered. "Let's split them between the 2 of us," Izuku offers and Egon nods, but not before stamping his shoe on Izuku's toes. A while later Izuku was sitting in his office with the first interviewee sitting across from him. Unfortunately, he did expect her to be so big and ended up having to use 4 chairs just so she could sit comfortably. The woman in question was a very tall, fox-like woman with a curved figure. She has blonde hair that just reaches her shoulders, a single strand of which goes down the right side of her face. She has large blue eyes with bushy eyelashes and pointed ears, along with teal-green fur and a white furry underbelly. In terms of attire, she wears an orange buttoned-up shirt with yellow-orange buttons and pockets on both sides of her chest, as well as black pants with a yellow-orange belt. She wears a wristband of the same color on both of her arms, along with an orange headband that seems to resemble a pair of earmuffs. She also wears orange and cream-colored slip-on shoes. The two of them sat in silence for a long while after Izuku noticed something strange with her resume and called Egon to come to help him. But as time went on, it was apparent she was getting very nervous and anxious. So trying to calm her nerves, Izuku said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Futsu Josei, the woman pronounces her name. Well, I'm sorry for making you wait for so long. The professor should have been here by now to assess your predicament, Izuku assures her as she nods back in affirmation. Suddenly the automatic door slid open, causing the two to jump at its suddenness, and in walks a very irritated Egon covered head to foot in bubbles. After shaking himself off he stomps inside and announces, "Sorry, I'm late, Izuku." Hatsum tried to weaponize bubbles and turned the entire robotics division into a foam party. "Now what seems to be the holy moly," he exclaimed upon seeing the large woman. "Wow! You, my dear, are a whole lot of women," Egon commented, craning his head to meet her eyes. "Professor," Izuku scolded after seeing the woman uncomfortably blush and fidget. "What? People gawk at statues of naked people and pagan gods, I gawk at large women," Egon argues back. "Professor," Izuku yells at him. "Fine, fine." Sheesh, Egon finally concedes in a grown-up before taking his more professional mannerisms and saying to her, "Sorry about that, you're just a lot to take in all at once." "I get that a lot," Josie replies, her ears pointing down. Sitting next to Izuku he says, "Now what seems to be this precarious predicament you're telling me about?" Izuku hands him her resume, and reading it over he understands what he meant and said aloud, "Oh, I see." After reading it over a bit, he puts it down and takes a more proper and professional stance and mannerisms as he tells her flatly, "Well, Ms. Josei, according to your resume you have 0 work experience, 0 previous places of employment, and 0 skills for the job you're trying to get hired for. Can I just ask, why?" Suddenly she begins to tear up as she explains, "Please, I have no other choice. Due to my size and quirk, I'm not someone who is wanted for the workforce. No matter where I go." Josie puts her hands into her face and starts to weep bitterly in front of the two men, where Izuku gets up flailing and trying to calm her down. Telling her, "Oh, crap. Don't cry. Don't cry. Please don't cry." "Yeah, we don't need you making Izuku cry as well, then we'll have to brave the high seas," Egon chipped in a low snarky tone only Izuku could hear. The teen whipped around and yelled at him, "Professor. Am I wrong?" he asks back with a teasing smile, making the boy blush in anger. Seeing things starting to unravel, Izuku takes charge and tells her with a firm tone, "Ms. Josei, due to your circumstances we have decided to give you a chance." She stops crying at this news and smiles wide before Izuku tells her, "But don't be fooled by the title of secretary. It's not about sitting at a desk in cute clothes, clacking at a keyboard with finely manicured nails, making copies and coffee for your boss. It has a lot of challenges and most of all experience curves. Are you willing to do all you can to achieve the best outcome possible?" Josie sniffles back her tears and holds up her head while saying, "Why yes. I am." "Well then, you start tomorrow at 6 a.m. sharp. You'll be shadowing our head secretary, front desk lady, and organizer. They will teach you all you need to take over their jobs when need be," he tells her while holding out his hand. So elated by this, Josie grabs it and begins to shake it while exclaiming, "I'll do my best." Unfortunately, she also didn't notice she was shaking him as well. She stops, letting him go and apologizing. After making vertigo go away, Izuku shakes his head, fixes his glasses, and tells her, "Though we will have to make arrangements for your size difference." "Thank you," she says gratefully. Izuku turns back around to scold Egon but sees him standing there with a ridiculous open-mouth smile and holding 2 thumbs up. It then dawns on Izuku that his mentor merely did all that to test him. And apparently, he passed, but not to his pleasure. Sometime later, Izuku's office was once again beset by someone who was looking for a job. Only this time there were 2 of them like Morgan told them. A man and a woman, both of which were quite unique in both appearance and personality. The 2 of them appear very similar to one another in both appearance and age. Maybe they were siblings or something? They both had white hair, red eyes, tall, slim, yet toned physiques, and clothing that could only be described as old-fashioned ancient in terms of style yet still held the appearance of a scientist. The woman had glasses and the man had a strange pack on his back that fell into a tub on his strange goggles. "Ah yeah. Check it out. Ace Researcher Pura," the woman, Pura, exclaimed while holding a rock-on sign by her head and winking. "And Ace Researcher Robbie, hee," the man, Robbie, exclaimed as he struck a pose. Abe shot his hand while pointing a finger into the air. Reporting for duty, they both stayed in unison. Izuku laughed dryly and said, "You two sure are extravagant. So, why exactly do you two want to work here? And what do you have to bring to the table?" I'm glad you asked, Vice President, Pura said as she took out a file from her bag, placing it before him as she offered, have a look at this. It sure is thick, Izuku comments aloud while feeling the folder that looked ready to burst. It's the Cliff Notes, Robbie told him. Shooting his eyes open in shock, Izuku exclaimed, these are the Cliff Notes? I'd hate to see the whole thing. You see, Director, we are researchers in the field of ancient technology, Pura explained. Izuku narrows his eyes, no longer impressed by them as he cautiously asked, what like the pyramids were built by Dash? But Robbie cut him off as he strode around the room, bobbing as if he were dancing to a song, and told him, yes, we all know that the pyramids were built by Hebrew slaves and not aliens. We're talking about something else. Now curious again, Izuku sat back to take it all in. Seeing this, Pura opened the file and flipped several pages to one part where she pointed out with her fan, studies show that the sandstones used in the construction of these monumental tombs of kings were crafted and sent from the southwest part of Africa. And studies showed that they were far faster in their delivery than methods of that age. The only question that reminds me is, how? Before the woman could answer that question, Robbie jumped in and exclaimed while pointing to the air, I'll tell you how. It's ancient technology, y'all, hee. Aha, Izuku replied, sitting forward again as his curiosity turned back into caution. Still not convinced? How about this? Pura asked while tilting her head before explaining. Back when Genghis Khan was expanding his empire of the far west and north, recent studies have shown that he was able to take over towns, villages, and cities in a time much shorter than travel would be possible in these places. Not only that, reports translated from text say that the Khan army appeared from nowhere and took them by surprise without any warning from scouts. So how did they cover so much land and take over so many civilizations in such a short time? So how, you may ask? Well, by Dash, Robbie tried to exclaim once more. Only for Izuku to butt in and say, ancient technology, yes, I get it, Robbie. Izuku looks over all the notes for several minutes before taking off his glasses to run his eyes and tell them, to be fair, I had never thought of this before. Humans have been excavating resources from the earth for centuries. If at some point they found a vein of, then they could have, he trailed off while deep in thought, muttering to himself before changing the subject and asking, so why choose us of all places? When we saw you pull out and explain that splinter thing, we knew it just had to be connected. Pura answers affirmatively with a smile. So we dropped everything and came here looking for a job, Robbie added. Izuku turned around in his chair and thought this over before turning back to them and saying with his hand out, well then, I guess you two are hired. Meanwhile, in Egon's office, he too was interviewing one or the groups of two that came in. Sitting across from him were two people so vastly different he didn't know such a pair could exist. The first was a toddler-sized human-slash-reindeer hybrid with the left antler broken but braced at the base by a metal plate. He has a larger head and eyes and a less defined muzzle. He wears a large pale red/pink fuzzy top hat with a sideways medical cross covered in a blue aviator cap, a blue backpack, an orange and white striped muscle shirt, and a maroon pair of shorts. The other person was an old woman who surprisingly didn't look a day close to 70. She stands tall and slim with a body that seems to be in her prime despite her wrinkled face. She wears an outfit made for someone much younger, which includes a navel ring, a shirt that bears her midriff, a purple blazer, and purple low-riding pants. She has a pair of small sunglasses that, when they're not over her eyes, she wears them on her forehead. Alongside that, she wears bracelets and rings on her left hand, with a hardened expression on her face. She looked like a real no-nonsense person. Looking over the papers, Egon asks them, so your names are Dr. Kureha and Dr. Tony Chopper, yes? That's right, but you can call me Doctrine, everyone does, Doctrine tell him in a gravely voice. And everyone calls me Chopper, Chopper added with a happy tone that held a nervous tick. Well, I certainly like what you two got going for you. This alone would guarantee you both spots in my facility, he tells them, making Chopper brighten until he followed up, though I have a question for you, Doctrine. The woman tilts her head as she adjusted the toothpick in her mouth. It says here that you have unorthodox methods? Can you explain? He inquires. Suddenly the woman gets up from her seat, walks up to Egon, and begins to poke and prod at him in all sorts of ways while saying, your temperature is 98.2 degrees, pulse is 86, blood pressure is 125/85, and BMI is 17.5. Shall I continue? After tasting an old lady out of his mouth, when she stuck her fingers in there for a temperature reading, he gets up and replies, please wait here. After Egon leaves and Doctrine sits back down with her feet propped up on the desk, Chopper comments, "I think you scared him." She then whirls to him and punched him straight on the head while yelling, "Don't be stupid." "Of course, I didn't." A few minutes later and Egon was in with a flabbergasted expression, after getting his physical results, as he says, "I don't believe it." "Well, believe it," she said back to him as Egon gingerly put himself back into his chair. After this, he breathes a calming breath and asks her, "There's also one other thing. It says here you've been practicing for over 80 years. Even if you got into medical school at 16, you'd be well over 120 years old." "I am," she says flatly. "You're what?" he asks her again. 120 years old, she tells him nonchalantly. Trying to freak out over the fact that one of the oldest living people was in his office, he then said while looking at the small animal person, changing the subject, "Chopper, you are quite young to be a doctor. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The vice president happens to be the same age as you." With this news, Chopper beams so brightly that Egon almost had to look away from him, but put a hand up to shield his eyes and push through as he continues, "I just want to know what encouraged you to pursue such a career. I can tell it isn't the woman sitting beside you." With that comment, Egon has to quickly move his head out of the way from a very irritated Doctrine's flying toothpick. Chopper stops his beaming and becomes suspiciously quiet and reserved like he was having a flashback. After his somber expression turns to determination, he proclaimed, "I want to find a cure for every disease in the world." Egon smiled and says, "That's a wonderful dream. I hope that by working here you can achieve it." Chopper nods enthusiastically as Egon inputs, "Also I'm quite fascinated by your quirk. A mutation that makes you look like a reindeer and a small one at that." "That's because he is," Doctrine interjected. "Is what?" Egon asks back. "A reindeer," she says nonchalantly. Egon blinks several times, looking between her and Chopper until he points at him and asks, "Intelligent animal?" "You got cotton shoved in your ears," she replied in an annoyed tone. After taking a moment to digest all of this, he tells the intelligent animal, "Well, Chopper, you'll be ecstatic to know that 2 of our other residents are also intelligent animals." Chopper once again beams at this news, but then Egon leans into him and whispered, "But my advice to you. Stay away from Dr. Cluck Orpington. She's nuts." "I heard that you, hairless monkey," Cluck shouted from behind his office door. "Like I said, nuts," Egon egged on. The very last person to be interviewed was Izuku, who found himself with an old and strange-looking man sitting across from him with the biggest forced smile he'd ever seen. He was a strange short man who was already dressed like a scientist with a lab coat button-up, a red tie, pants, and black shoes. He was bald with the only hair left on his head growing from the back and sides, which gave him 2 twin tail bushels off the sides. A large nose and thick mustache-colored gray framed his face. Feeling suspicious rising, he asked the man, "Dr. Albert W. Wiley. Am I saying that right?" "Please, Dr. Wiley is fine," he tells him with a small wave, trying too hard to act friendly. "I like what I see, but Izuku began until he was cut off. "But," Wiley asked too quickly. Looking back down at the papers he tells him, "It says here you've been fired from several different laboratories in your career." "I may be young, sir, but I know the red flags when I see one," he inquires while leaning in. The facade dropped and Wiley loudly proclaimed while pointing at him, "It's not my fault, I swear." Narrowing his eyes while raising an eyebrow, he prompted him, "Go on." Wiley calmed down a bit and then explained, "My old associate, Dr. Light, is to blame. I'll spare you the details. We butted heads on a lot of things, and in the end, he tried to ruin me multiple times. But I'm far more resourceful than he thinks." Yeah. After performing this little scene, Wiley froze up knowing he had done himself in. All while Izuku continues to bore holes into him with his suspicious glare. He knew right away this guy was bad news and he should probably just cut his losses and throw him out. But then he thought it over a little bit more and realized that this man could potentially be too dangerous or slippery to handle for anyone in the future if he got in with the wrong crowd. So the best option going forward would be to bring him on so he could watch him closely and have control over everything you did. As the saying goes, sometimes it's better to have the devil as your ally than to have him as your enemy. So rubbing his temples he sighs deeply and tells the old man, "Tell you what. I'll give you a chance. But if I find out that what's been said is true, you can kiss your resourcefulness goodbye," he said in a firm threatening tone while glaring daggers at him. Wiley adjusts his tie and gulps deeply while sweating and answering, "I accept the terms of your agreement." And that concludes another productive day at the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility. Egon proclaimed that she locked up the front door of the facility one fateful night. Does he always monologue? Chopper asks while sweat dropping. Only when he's in a good mood, Morgana tells him with a small chuckle. Egon whips around with a huge smile and tells them, "You're damn right I am. I've got a hot date with a little lady." "I get it. You're dating my mom," Izuku yells in a groan while covering his ears. Egon huffs while pushing out his chest and stating, "And I'm gonna keep saying it until you stop complaining about it or asking me to stop dating her." This then caused the two to engage in a mini argument about the topic, causing awkward energy to hang around the few employees who stayed late. However, the argument between the two owners stopped when a certain topic was broached. "Hey, why are you bringing the mascot with you?" Hankoyo asked as Pete was trying to snap at one of his head tubes. Egon quickly scoped the bird up and explained, he doesn't like being left alone. "But we have dozens of them in the facility," Chopper states with confusion. "He just likes people," Egon shrugs back. "So you bring the brainless bird but not Otto or Cluck?" Wiley inquires as he adjusts research papers into his briefcase. Egon looks off to the side, sucking air between his teeth, as he said, "I tried, once. It didn't work and now they live here full time." "Why's that?" Morgana asks. Egon sighs, like bringing up an exhausting memory, and explains in short, "House guests are like fish. They stink after 3 days. And when they came to stay with me, they'd already ripened 2 days prior." "Is it also because Otto smells like fish?" Doctorin adds with a cackle as she finishes off her first bottle of booze of the night. Egon wiggles his hand in a SOSO manner, placing Pete on his head, and explains with aggravation, "That's just a small part. But also Cluck got me up at the ass crack of dawn for food and Otto kept bugging me for mental stimulation." Before anything else could happen, a strange person in a hoodie came out of nowhere and practically threw themselves in front of the entryway steps, scraping everyone half to death as they scream, "Help me!" Everyone jumps at their sudden arrival and gets ready for a fight or to run. One of them was Pete who, after falling off Egon's head, ran up to the person, jumped on their head, and began mercifully pecking them. To which the person ignored and continued yelling in a desperate plea, "Please, please help me." "What the? Who are you? What's wrong?" Izuku asks after realizing they were in no danger. But the person still didn't explain anything as he continued to beg as Pete mercilessly attacked him, "Please help me. Hide me. Before they find me." "Before who finds you?" Izuku asks as he moves back, seeing the person crawling toward them. Egon places a hand on his shoulder and tells him with his staff, "We'll ask questions later. I'll open the door, you help him inside, and Morgana you call the heroes dashed." But before he could finish the person suddenly shrieks, "No. Don't call them. They're working with them." "The heroes?" Izuku asks back, trying to draw the lines. "Yes," he exclaimed as Pete still attacked him. A little while later the mystery person, now known as a man, was helped into the building by the scientists. After getting him inside one of the division wings, they closed down the building again, making it look closed from the outside as they stayed in the deeper parts of the building where no light could be seen from within. Once they had the man settled, they woke up Otto and Cluck from their downtime and got back to work trying to figure out this person and what had gotten him in such a frenzy. Especially over refusing help from the heroes or law enforcement. They even had to put Pete in another room to keep from continuing to attack him. The man in question was about 30 or so, tall and so incredibly thin. Bald, had green eyes, and black skin with his skeleton that seems to either bleed through or was painted upon his skin. He sorta looked like a well-made skeleton costume. He somehow looked tired and out of his wits at the same time. The man was sitting in a testing chamber, in front of a table where he was drinking glass after glass of water as Izuku and Egon stood behind the one-way glass and observed him. Izuku was looking over something on a Pura pad, made by its namesake, when Egon asked him, "So whatcha got on him?" Flipping through the information he just managed to gather, he answered, "His name is Viktor Petrov. He's from Russia and is wanted in several parts of the world." This surprised him and sent Egon on edge, thinking they had just aided a known criminal or terrorist. But taking it in stride he continued with suspicion in his tone, "Wanted for what? It doesn't say." "I mean it does say, but I'm pretty sure they're fabrications," Izuku told him with an unsure tone as he handed the pad over to him. Taking the pad and adjusting his glasses he looks over the info on the man and is shocked by what he sees. Exclaiming in disbelief, "Geez, you're right, seen by the untrained eye these are fabricated. Why in the world are several countries across the globe trying to get this one guy?" Before Izuku could theorize on this, Otto comes in and answers, "It's his quirk. The octopus handed him a clipboard of information printed off about the man's biology. Egon sighs and tells him, "Thanks again for helping us despite it being your time off, Otto." Otto waves him off and assures him, it's all part of the job. Anyway, I ran a sample of his DNA and I managed to decode what his quirk can do. And, Izuku prompts him. I've personally dubbed it as resurrection, he tells them as they both look over the sheet of paper with all the current information they had on Victor's quirk. If he touches something after it has long since died, he can bring it back to life no matter what state it's in, Otto explains, making the two men look on in shock with every word they heard and read to themselves. He could touch a piece of hair and bring back a whole woolly mammoth from it. But we don't need to do that, do we? Otto jokes. Egon rolls his eyes and snorts in amusement as he replies, we don't. But wow! That's quite a power. It's no wonder he's being hunted like an animal. If anyone in the world managed to get their hands on that, they'd be unstoppable. Izuku nods and the two men decide to confront the man to get the whole truth and why he was even here. So they entered the testing chamber where the man just fished off a second picture of water. Sitting across from him, Izuku starts by asking in a kind tone, "Hey Victor, how are you feeling?" "Better," he admits while breathing deeply. "You don't have to worry. You're safe," Izuku assures him. "Thank you again for helping me," Victor graciously tells them. "We, kinda figured some stuff about you," Egon admitted. Victor shoots them both a look and inquires, "Let me guess. My background or my quirk?" Egon put his hands together and answered, "Yes to both. We understand your situation but we don't know why you came to us for help." Victor looks off to the side, a sign that they were in for an origin story, and the man tells them, "Ever since I was young, my mother told me I was special." Though I didn't know how much she truly meant it, he started but could see in the men's eyes that they were already getting tired of hearing it, or just tired. So Victor sighs and tells them, "I'll spare you the details, but one day a friend of mine was killed in an accident, and well, I brought her back. From then on I was hunted down no matter where I went. I got to a point when I tried to kill myself." Both men become extremely uncomfortable by this, especially Izuku from his previous experience with this. But seeing that the man was very much alive and that Izuku was too uncomfortable to ask, Egon inquired carefully, "I'm guessing your quirk works just as much on you as it does on others." "Precisely," Victor told him with a dry and crazed chuckle. "Then I heard about your facility and I came here as fast as I could so I could ask no so I could beg you. Please. Help me." He suddenly threw himself across the table and grabbed at the two scientist lab coats. Pulling the hopelessly desperate man off and seating him back down, Izuku asked him in a horrified tone, "What do you want us to do?" "Try and kill you." "I want you to take away my quirk," he answered quickly. "Take away your, what?" the two scientists ask before looking at one another. He gets down on his hands and knees before them and pleads, "Please. I know how amazing you all are. You're smart and have some kind of ace up your sleeves getting you this far after such a short time. So, please. Do anything to rid myself of this nightmare," he begs as tears fall from his face. The two scientists quickly excuse themselves from the room and once on the other side of the door, Izuku asks in stress, "Egon, what'll we do? No one's ever attempted to extract a quirk from a person. I'm not even sure such a thing is possible. Science is already determined. It's no different from my color and height." Egon opens his mouth to agree, but stops and thinks for a bit before replying, "I wouldn't think so. The Nomu had multiple quirks so it is possible. But we have no idea how to do that," Izuku argues back. Egon puts in a thinking expression as he takes his brain from an idea. He sees the hallway sign that leads to the Singularity Soul and smiles as he tells his ward. "Maybe not but we have to try." Egon then pulls out his phone and it picks up quite quickly as he says to the other end, "Hatsum, I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour but we need your help." The man says something on the other end and Egon tells him, "I'll spare you the nitty-gritty but in short, we need to extract a quirk from a living person." Suddenly the line goes dead and Egon calls out loud, "Hello? Say no more, I'm on the case," Hatsum suddenly exclaims after appearing from nowhere, making the two men jump in fright so bad they nearly wet themselves. Frantically looking around and at the one-eyed man, Egon sputters out before realizing, "How did you stole the super speed splinter, didn't you?" Hatsum just sticks out his tongue while putting his hand on his head, trying to act coy. But Egon just sighs exhausted while rolling up his sleeves and telling him, "We'll talk about this later. Let's get to work." The hours of the night went by quickly as all the scientists still at the facility worked as hard as they could plan, design, and make a machine capable of performing an unnatural feat of nature and science. Hatsum was in his element and was buzzing around as he made this contraption. Egon couldn't tell if it was the caffeine or the super speed splinter he had forgotten to take from him. It also helped a lot that they had an army of robots to do the work of 100 men and a few splinters that helped with aiding in brain function and construction. Including a strange splinter that allowed someone to construct anything like it is made of Legos, so long as they knew how to put it together. Things were going well, too well. And that foreboding feeling manifested in a message from Morgana. Sir, there's a small militia out by the front of the building," she said over the speakers. Egon quickly took out his own Purapad and brought up the security cams from the outside where, as the woman said, there was a small militia from what seemed to be another country standing outside his front entryway. So he stopped what he was doing and cleaned himself off before going to meet with the army. Once he got to the front he took a deep breath and unlocked it. Stepping outside before the army and their tanks he asked as innocently as he could, "Can I help you boys with something? We're looking for a man by the name of Viktor Petrov. He looks like a skeleton and is a wanted fugitive in several countries," the frontman, no doubt the leader, told him in a thick accent. Egon placed a finger to his chin and shaking his head told the man, "Sorry, I haven't seen anyone like that." But before he could turn around to leave, the man yelled, "Don't lie." "Who's lying?" Egon asks back while keeping calm. "We know," he insisted. "Know what?" Egon insisted back. The man then took his own iPad device and turned it around to show aerial footage of Victor racing towards the facility and being brought inside as the leader stated, "We know." Thinking face, Egon put up his hands while acting calm and admitted, all right, you got me. I'll bring him out so no need to get violent." But the leader wasn't having it as he approached the front steps as he tried to force, "No. We will come in and dash dot." But he didn't even get a chance to finish as every security measure at the front of the facility suddenly sprang to life and pointed their laser-guided lights at the leader and all the soldiers present. The leader froze in his tracks upon seeing this and slowly backed away, but the laser lights did not go away. Upon seeing the smug expression of Egon, he gulped while grimacing and the scientist repeated, "I said, I'll bring him out. So let's not get violent, yes?" Taking a deep breath, the leader agreed, yes. Once he was back inside the building he stood over in one of the darker parts and leaned against a wall while letting out a stressed breath from fear. After calming down he looked over to his side, seeing nothing at first, but continued to stare until Izuku suddenly appeared out of the air thanks to the invisibility splinter. Izuku just smiled awkwardly at him and Egon just rubbed his head as he thought. After thinking over their predicament he told Izuku, "Get the dragon." Izuku nods and vanishes again. After a few minutes of what seemed to be a stalemate between the foreign troops and the NIP security system, Egon makes his reappearance once stands boldly before the aggravated troops and proclaims, "Sorry to keep you boys waiting, but here he is," he stated while motioning off to the side of the building. When the soldiers do, instead of seeing their quarry being brought out to them from a different part of the building, they see something that locks them in place with fear. Between the darkness of the night, the city lights casting a vague casting alongside the red glow of the laser-gilded weapons, they saw the shape of a huge creature with eyes that burned like hellfire and bore into their souls. Without a single warning, the hideous shape breathed deeply and exhaled a stream of flame so massive and hot that none of them had the chance to scream before they were all engulfed. When the fire settled from Torchwick's charred mouth, the only thing left of the invaders was nothing but a pool of molten blood, bone, and molten metal from the tanks. Nothing remained of them. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Izuku pets the now elephant-sized dragon, telling him good job and bringing him back to his enclosure. Egon sighs with relief at seeing their potential problem taken care of while saying to the puddle, "You get what you deserve. Bitches." After spitting at the molten pool of death, Ihan presses a comlink on his ear and says, "Send some cleaning bots to scrape up the mess out in the front." Almost immediately a whale squad of bots come out of nowhere and begin to clean and dispose of the evidence. By morning it'll be like nothing even happened. Egon walks back into the building and back to the division wing where Victor was hooked up to the machine that would hopefully extract his quirk. It is so large and concluded that much of its inner workings went over Egon's head. He just hoped this monster would work. As he approached the hooked-up skeleton man, he asked him, "Professor? What was all that noise?" Egon waves it off while a kind smile and tells him, "Oh, nothing you need to worry about." But on a more serious note, "Listen, Victor, what we're about to do is completely experimental, highly dangerous, and comes with a high chance of you dying. We've never done something like this before and have practically thrown this machine together in the last few hours. No tests have been made even with all the synthesized scenarios for the outcomes. There is also a huge chance of this not working at all or killing you. Are you sure you want to go through this? Victor closes his eyes, nods, and affirms, I'm sure. Even if my quirk was taken and I survived, I wouldn't have a life to go back to. He then looks down at the huge machine with metal parts and strange tubes connected along its body and hooked up to several parts of his own as he asks, just explain how it works. Izuku, who just came back from putting up torch wick for the night, explains to him, we found these things called quirk centers, and they're basically what everyone has in determining where their quirk manifests the most. We'll hook up to those spots and use a machine that has a reversed polarity charge to bring it out. The site of this will be used from the large crystal structure you see on the other end. The crystal will be used to suck up and store away your quirk. Could you dumb that down? Victor asks him, his brain already short-circuiting. We're going to suck your quirk from special unseen holes in your body using the power of that huge crystal to remove and store it away, Izuku says in more simplified terms. That makes more sense. Victor finally relents with acknowledgement. Then it was Dr. Orpington who came up in her mechanical device and reading off a clipboard she announced to him, there's a 5% chance of full success with no death. A 27% chance of it working with you dying. A 67% chance of it not working and you just die. A 30% chance of this not working and you survive. And a 59% chance of this machine exploding and dashed up. Okay. We get it, Wiley yells at her, seeing how uncomfortable she was making everyone with her analysis. Doctorin then took up the front and told Victor in no uncertain terms, her voice very regretful and somewhat nervous as she doused her mood in more booze, listen, kid, I won't lie. I've crunched the numbers and this will hurt like hell. I've made a sedative geared towards your specific bodily functions and we'll sedate you with it, but I can't promise anything after that. I told you to do it anyway, Victor told her, and the rest of the staff with no hesitation. Doctorin shrugs after taking a long sip from her bottle and relents, so be it. As Egon goes to the controls for the machine, punching it all he needs to show the greatest leg of success, as Chopper and Doctorin prepped Victor for the procedure, Wiley came up to his side with Izuku and inquired, Professor Egon, are you sure about this? You're using the thing that started and is keeping this place afloat. Egon stopped thinking up his mile-a-minute calculations and typing as he leaned down his head and sighed deeply. After which he told the short old man, it's for a special cause. Besides, we're not copying a quirk, we're taking one out. We'll need everything we can use to pull this off. Besides, we've already established that there's more and we know where to look. Both he and Izuku did not look fully convinced. So he rolled his eyes at their twin concerns and assured them, I've already got Pura and Robbie working on setting up an expedition to dig up more. The two of them already knew how passionate and on par their new co-workers were. They had only been here a short time and had managed to simultaneously turn the place upside down while making huge leaps in research. They just left yesterday for their trip, but knowing them they'd probably send back several veins of the Singularity Soul and an alien to boot. Izuku was the first to relent as he said, I guess you're right. This is what a hero would do. Goodbye, Singularity Soul. Thanks for everything so far. Wiley was not so pleased but had no room to argue. So he just sat there and stewed in his frustration. On the other hand, he'd have his name on the title of being one of the first people to extract a genetic trait. So that brightened up his mood ever so slightly. After typing in the last bit of numbers into the machine, Egon placed on goggles and announced, begin. The machine burst to life and the Singularity Soul also began to glow an even brighter white to the point it became the spotlight. Things seemed to be going well at first, with red energy being pooler out from the tubes attached all over Victor and slowly being drawn into the Singularity Soul. The scene attached to the machine showed the progress going from 5 to 30% in a slow yet concise manner. Then things started to go wrong once it was 40%. The machine began to whirl, buzz and expel excess heat far faster than it did before to the point of the sound started to become overwhelming. Victor, who had been holding up well so far, spat out the mouthguard he was biting down on as he started to scream in pain. Fear and anxiety gripped the scientist and some wanted to stop the procedure, but Egon refused. Not knowing what would happen if they stopped midway through and the potential consequences it may hold. So they continued as the machine ran faster and Victor screamed louder and louder. Soon the machine began to fizzle and buzz and short-circuit wildly and dangerously. But Egon yelled for them to keep going. The machine was only at 70%, and every moment was like hell. Suddenly the machine began to burst and catch fire. The scientist rushed to keep it under control and Egon wanted to stop it once things caught aflame. But it was Victor who swayed him and yelled to keep going. So reluctantly he agreed. And the process finally hit 90% as the Singularity Soul began to die down and change color. Victor kept screaming as blood began to pool out from all his orifices. Finally, it hit 100% and the machine stopped as fireboys came in to put out the flaming machine as the kickback of energy nearly knocked the facility's power out. Turning the emergency stop on, Egon jumped from behind the controls and yelled, "Victor! Victor! Get him out of there!" Izuku and Doctrine spring into action as they ripped the man away from all his hookups and placed him on the ground where Chopper got to work checking his vitals. As the staff surrounded the man's smoking and bloody body, the machine was burning faster and faster as the fire bite worked to put it out. After a few horrible seconds, Izuku asks, "How is he?" Chopper pulls away from him and says, "He's alive, but barely." At that moment, Victor stirred and weakly called out, "P. Professor. D. Doctor." "Yes, we're all here," Izuku told him, taking his hand to reassure him. He breathed heavily and ragged as he barely mumbled out in a whisper, Did it work?" Izuku sniffles back tears and confirms, "Yes. Yes, it did. Your quirk is gone." Egon waved his hand and Wily brought over a hand mirror that Izuku held up to his face. Victor could barely open his eyes, but when he did, he saw himself without black skin and a skeleton that bled through his body. Now he saw a normal Russian man with fine skin and blue eyes. A smile crept onto his face as he barely managed to say, "So, this is how I look, am I glad?" With that last word, Victor took his last breath, closed his eyes, and left this world. A smile still on his peaceful face. The scientist gathered around the man and parted with his passing in silence, shedding tears as they did so. "He's gone," Chopper said with a tone of disbelief. "Oh, Victor. I hope you found peace," Izuku sniffles. I hate to break up a mournful moment like this, but what are we supposed to do with the Singularity Soul that now houses the Resurrection Quirk?" Hatsum put forth. They all looked at the Singularity Soul and saw how it drastically changed. Instead of glowing white, it glowed as dark black with white parts that almost looked like it had bones showing through. But there were no bones ever seen on any living creatures, just a strange assortment of shapes and lengths. It looked like Victor before his quirk was taken. And it dawned on them. The procedure may have killed him, but it worked in storing his quirk. Without a moment of hesitation, Egon walked up to the Singularity Soul, picked it up over his head, and threw it down with all his might, smashing it to bits and causing a group gasp from everyone else. Turning around with a ragged expression and breathing heavily, a serious look on his face, he told them in no uncertain terms, "I want all the fragments collected and destroyed. This quirk doesn't exist in any records around the world and it will stay that way. No one is to speak of what has happened tonight. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they all said in unison. Calming down after this, he said to the staff in an exhausted voice, "Good. Then clean up the mess and go home. You all deserve a good rest. I'll cremate Victor's body." Just as the cleaning bot came in to collect the mess and Egon went to put Victor's body on a stretcher, Izuku spoke up and offered, "Can't we just bring him back?" Egon turned to him, a somber expression on his face as he asked back, "Do you think he'd want that?" Izuku looked down at the peaceful face of the dead man, a single tear running down his face as he answered back, "Yeah, that was a stupid question." As the body was covered and sent off to the blast furnace, Morgan came up and said, Sir. If I could make a suggestion," Egon have his attention and the woman offered, "do you think we should erect a statue in honor of him? For his sacrifice to science." Everyone perked up at that idea and with a sad smile on his face, Izuku chimed in and stated, "That's a wonderful idea. We'll do that soon. First, let's get the ever-growing dragon out of here before he outgrows the whole facility." The other staff laughed a bit at the joke, and this ended a tragic and monumental day for Laboratory. A day that would never be spoken of or only be known again decades later. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share the video and support the original writer. See you in the next video?